Well, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Sergio Claudio Perroni. Sergio Claudio Perroni is meeting us today for to talk about 4 different aspects of writing, of the art of being a writer. I like to quote a short phrase for J. McInerney, an Irish writer, who said, when Italian critics compliment my prose, I know that more than enough of the credit must go to Sergio Claudio Perroni. And I'll do my best to translate what Mr. Perroni says. He speaks English, so he will understand you quite well, but for some reasons, he wants me to translate. When I started to talk with Mr. Perroni about this meeting, we were saying that this is somehow speaking of different aspects of this job, being a writer. And what is the difference between being an editor and being a creative writer? In fact, it is the page itself. A black page, we could say, that has been already written, and a white page, which is completely empty. But the work, the mental work that you do on these pages is completely different. So I like to ask to Sergio Perroni, and I like to start from his job as a translator. And
which is a great page.
A great page.
Between the black and
what are the difficulties implied in translating from a linguistic point of view, but also rewriting, reinterpreting what the writer meant to say? Dunque, qual era la differenza? Qual è? No? Per me è capito
la differenza è che si cerca di capire innanzitutto il senso, in secondo luogo di cogliere lo stile, e questi 2 passaggi che sono di intelligenza poi tecnicamente trasferirli nella lingua tua, quindi la comprensione e lo stile.
So the first 2 steps is to understand the sense and the style of the writer, and try to work out the way to put this into your own language. Diresti che questo è un lavoro anche psicologico, di interpretazione dello scrittore? Would you say this is also a sort of psychologist kind of work to understand indeed the personality of an author?
Psychology gets into it when you can't understand what the writer, because it's a poor writer, is trying to convey, to mean, and then you try to get into his psychology and say, what the hell is she's trying to say? And then that's the only case in which psychologists normally you just try to understand, and it's easy if the writer is good, and it's your psychology which is in trouble then, to convey it in the same way in your language, without forcing the style and without forcing the meaning.
This is interesting. How free do you feel to modify somehow the sentence of a writer? What kind of space do you have in rewriting, so how much of yourself, of your style as an author, as an writer, would you put into interpretation?
I'm a great translator, so I have absolutely no room for my style when I translate, because I am just a mezzo, vehicle for the meaning and for the language, so I have to repropose exactly the meaning and the language and the style and the flux of the style. I cannot move with my own style and my own words. It's a photograph of a style and a meaning, and I have to confer it in Italian. But that photograph, that exact image of meaning and words, I cannot move. The bad translator put themselves inside. And
when you go to the school for interpretation, one thing that they teach you is that a good translation is a nice but unfaithful interpretation. Una bella. How much would you agree with that?
I don't agree. It's a similitude with the women. They say nice and unfaithful, or bad and faithful, or ugly and faithful. I don't know if they use it in USA, but in Italy, it's, since the 18th century, they use it for translations of the classic. There's Attilio Monti, translator of Homerus, and his translation of the Iliad was nice but unfaithful. You have to be nice and faithful to do a good translation. If the writer is not, what you translate is not nice, it's not appealing, you have to leave it unappealing, because it's not your matter to transform it in appealing. You have just to move that from that language to that place, which is another language.
This is interesting. So you don't think it's your job to make something nice? I mean, if something is ugly in itself, you just make it, just transfer.
Yeah, transfer.
As
yeah.
much.
Not transform, transfer.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
Which is the Latin root of translation, because translate means literally to move from this side to that side. And transfer is Greek for the same thing. Translato, transfero. It's just moving.
Okay. Can you tell more to the audience about your job as a translator? I mean, your daily job as a translator.
I don't know. It depends all the time about what you feel about what you're writing, what you're translating. You're feeling with what you love or you don't love of that writer. And the more you like it, the more easy it is to translate it, because you feel it. As my experience with one of probably the most difficult translation I've ever had was The Boom of the System of David Foster Wallace, which has been the most difficult but the best translation I've ever done, because it's funny, it's clever, it's smart, it's full of brain, but in an easy way. So it's hard to transfer, but it's easy, it's a pleasure, and it's 500 pages. And I translated in a ridiculous amount of time. It was just 2 months, because it was so good. It was translate. The other part, if you translate a bad writer, I mean, Welbeck, which is French, you probably don't know him, or you know him, which is a very bad writer, or Pat Conroy, which is an American bad writer. The language is very easy, but it's really hard to translate it, to transfer it, because you hate it. You hate the meaning, the lack of style, the lack of mind, the insincerity of the message. So you fight with yourself to be professional and trying to do your best when you just want to shut that book down and stop translating.
Well, I must say that most of the authors that Mr. Peroni translates are not easy authors. They are special in many ways. And but my question is different. I think that one of the most difficult things for a translator is the play with words. I mean, what makes a great writer is the easiness in playing with words, and also manipulating, words. In his own book, there's a whole chapter where he tells, for example, about this young boy that loved to change the names of the objects. Semaforo, the traffic light, he would call it fermaforo, which is a play on words because that means a light which is used to stop somehow. Now, for example, this would be incredibly difficult to translate into English or another language because the play on words also depends very much on the musicality and how close the pronunciation is to the original word. Now, my question is, have you ever found any writer like you that manipulates words, and how difficult is then to transfer this manipulation into your own language?
It's a lot difficult, but it's good to try. I translated a book of Kurt Vonnegut, which title is Timequake, which is a pun, a play of words. And I tried to find something in Italian which could confer the same meaning and the same kind of play with words. And I succeeded in finding chronosisma, which is chrono is Greek, but chronograph means time, right in time. Chronos and graph. So chrono means time and sisma means quake, earthquake. So I succeeded in conferring the same feeling of pun and the same meaning. About playing with words, there's James Roy, who plays all the time with words in a simple way, by always replaying the titles of the tabloid of the 50s, which were the big newspaper of the 50s were always with titles with alliteration, just word starting with A or B or F. And he does this all the time. But he does it all the time with something which doesn't work sometimes. He writes one page all with words starting with the A, apart from one. And the second page is the same thing with all, but no lack of words. So you wonder, but this lacking of this one word has a meaning, or is Mr. Roy just giving them about that word because it was too difficult? So I should translate with all the words with that initial, or I should leave that one, and I don't leave it, and I translate all the, because I understand there is no mistake here. On the other part, David Foster Wallace, which I implore you to read because it's a very good reading.
Anyone has ever read anything about Wallace? Yeah? Well, you did.
And Broom of the System is, I think, his best novel, because then he inflated from 1,500 pages to 1,000 pages with the second novel, and it was too much. But that one, and he played not with words but with everything. And then there's a story of a person, a 40 years old man, which together with other things, other problems, had a big problem with his little penis. So sometimes he speaks about it, or he has conflict with this thought. But in one page, I say 350, he's talking about some other things. And he says that that smell was bad. But he doesn't write smell, he writes small, which is a Freudian lapsus. He meant to say smell, and he wrote, and he says, the character says small, because he always thinks about his small penis. But Mr. Wallace didn't write it in italic or in some other way you can understand. He means to confer this meaning. He just wrote small. So you can, when you translate, you may think it's just a mistake on the book, because the meaning is smell. Then gets psychology, and you say no, that is meaningful. He writes a small one instead, and that is a play of words, but just one word in 500 pages.
So it's a little bit like a treasury hunting somehow. Always to
with some writing.
With some writers, yeah. Always keeping eyes wide open and be very sensitive to these things that might look as printing mistakes, but actually they are not, and they are done on purpose by the writers. I think I like to divide the interview in these 4 different parts for the 4 different aspects of writing. So I like to stop here and give some space to you and ask you if you have any question related to being a translator.
When you're translating, what kind of second source do you use or rely on? If you ever feel that you're incorrect or you need help on something, I mean, do you turn to a person that you trust, or do you turn to the author?
Well, turn to the author is the best thing, because he knows, first of all, in this case, Smolen's man didn't remember. So,
Really?
Yeah. So he said, "Oh, do what you want." No, because in Italy we published it 3 or 4 times later than that specific book. But normally you relate with the author, and then no, I just no, I have no other person. If I can get by myself, I'll ask the author if it's so difficult or so delicate and sensible the thing. You ask him. The problem is when you don't understand and the author is not living. Just to pray for.
But that brings us in another field. Any other question?
I do. And if you, pardon me if this is too difficult of a question, but I wonder how you reacted to the news of David Foster Wallace's death.
Well, I wrote it because the publisher who bought the rights for Italy wrote me with a message and said we didn't know what happened yet. Just he was dead. I said couldn't live. Was too intelligent. Couldn't survive. Was too much.
You could see it in his work.
Yes, it's sparkling brains. He wrote The Plumb of the System about a 40-something years old man when he was 22. And it was perfect. I was 40-something when I translated. And I felt, how can he understand what I feel about my age? Not about the small penis, but about the age. At 22, 23. It was incredible. So you cannot survive with a brain like that.
Just too much sensitive
Yeah.
as a person. Any other question?